Hey, yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my Pokemon TCG updated tier list with Black Bolt and White Flare legal. Black Bolt and White Flare are some of the brand new sets that have recently released, and they've changed the metagame, in my opinion, a decent bit. So today I'm going to be going over where I currently think the top decks in the format are standing. But with that being said, if you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's hop right into it here. So hopping into it here, we have a lot of different decks to talk about, and let's start off with one of the decks that has been getting quite a bit of talk recently, and that is going to be Golden Go. So this is a deck that does gain a few really important cards, gains access to the Genesect, which allows you to search your deck for those Golden Go, so boosts the consistency of the deck. You also gain Air Balloon as well, which is really, really important, just because it means you can freely retreat those Golden Goes and get that extra card from the coin bonus, which is very powerful. So in my opinion, this deck is really good at the moment. I currently have it in tier 1. It does very well against plenty of the top decks. For example, when you're playing up against decks like Gardevoir, Dragapult, and Grimmsnarl, you're going to have a pretty good time. So if you're able to play in a more isolated metagame where it's just, those decks, I think this deck is incredibly powerful. However, in my opinion, the more diverse the metagame gets, the more this deck can start to struggle, simply because a lot of its matchups against the tier 1 decks are really, really strong. However, when you start to play against the Charizards of the world, the Eevee boxes, decks like that might be not necessarily as popular as some of the top decks, Golden Go's linearity can kind of be exposed in those situations. But overall, when you hit the top decks, you're probably gonna have a pretty good time. All right, next up here, we have Dragapult. We have a couple different variants of Dragapult we're going to be talking about. We have Dragapult Charizard, the pure variant of Dragapult, and also Dragapult Dusknoir. So let's start off with the one that I personally think is the best positioned heading into this upcoming format. We have Dragapult Dusknoir. I think Dragapult Dusknoir is a very strong deck right now. I currently have it in tier 1. In my opinion, it is the best Dragapult deck equipped to beat some of its tougher matchups. For example, things like the Gardevoir matchup and also Grimmsnarl. Having access to that Dusknoir is just so important, and also has a pretty decent matchup against the Golden Go as well if you do play the Unfair Stamp. So yeah, I think this deck is really, really good. One of Dragapult's problems sometimes, specifically the Dusknoir variant, is it can be a little bit bricky at the beginning of the game, but it has fantastic comeback potential, and you have the ability to wipe board states very fast with that Cursed Blast ability. Next up here, we got Pure Dragapult. I got Pure Dragapult in tier 2. We most recently saw Tord Reklev get top 4 at the most recent North American International Championships with the pure build of the deck. And the deck is pretty good overall. It's just the matchup against Gardevoir is just so difficult. And now that there are 2 different variants of Gardevoir, which are going to take up a pretty decent chunk of the metagame, I personally think that this variant is a little bit weaker than some of the other ones that actually have answers to the Gardevoir matchup. Next up, we got Dragapult Charizard. I have Dragapult Charizard at the top of tier 2. It's kind of a deck that's just pretty decent into everything. It doesn't necessarily excel against a lot of the top decks, but it has a fighting chance against them. So if you're interested in a deck that pretty much takes 50-50s against a lot of the top decks, then this is, going to definitely be the one for you. But sometimes it feels almost a little bit too fair. It doesn't really do anything that's, super overpowered that some of these other decks do. And I think that's one of the things that holds the deck back. It's a pretty vanilla deck overall, in my opinion. Alrighty, next up here, we have Gardevoir. Now, there are a couple of different variants of Gardevoir. This tier list only has the Gardevoir Jellicent, but I will be talking about the 2 main ways to play it and which one I think is the strongest right now with the current metagame. So, currently at the moment, Gardevoir as a whole is just a tier 1 deck. It has been absolutely dominating the Pokemon TCG. However, I personally think the variant without Jellicent is stronger than the one with Jellicent right now. And there's a couple of reasons as to why. I would say the main reason as to why the, standard variant of Gardevoir is stronger is because you have access to more space. You get access to, potentially that extra Monkey Dory, possibly something like the Energy Switch as well. Just overall more consistency in general, possibly things like Drifloon, Bravery Charm, just have more space. On top of it too, the issue that Jellicent, in my opinion, is kind of running into right now is decks are getting prepared for it. We see things, like, Grimmsnarl, for example. I think that's a good one to talk about first. Grimmsnarl is prepared for it. Yeah, like you have access to the TM Devo, but they play usually 2 to 3 Spike Myth. They play, usually 2 TM Evolutions as well. Some lists play 1, but I think a lot of lists are going to go up to 2. So, they're prepared. Yeah, they don't have access to rare candy, but they have multiple ways to get into things, like their Morgrims and then into Grimmsnarls to be able to deal with the Jellicent. So, the Jellicent doesn't do as much as I think people kind of initially thought, as well for matchups, like Golden Go as well, right when the card, got released, you're like, oh, this card's going to do really well against things, like Golden Ghost shutting off the superior energy retrieval. Not necessarily. I've been seeing multiple Golden Go lists go up to 3, sometimes even 4 boss's orders, and potentially things like the Iron Bundle as well to work around the Jellicent, because it's pretty difficult to get 2 Jellicents up at once. So using things like the Iron Bundle, using that superior energy retrieval, getting tons of energy, and then using something like potentially a counter catcher or a boss's orders just to blow up the Jellicent is really, really good. So there's a couple problems, in my opinion, with the Jellicent right now. It does help out against the mirror, though. You do have a pretty decent mirror match if you have it, just because you're shutting off things like their super odds, their night stretchers, their counter catchers as well. That can be very difficult for them. However, I do think that the standard variant just is a lot more versatile, and since decks are already prepared for Jellicent heading into upcoming tournaments, specifically the World Championships, I think that the pure variant is the best way to play it. Next up here, we got Ho-Oh Armarouge. Ho-Oh Armarouge is a deck that did gain Prism Energy, which is a pretty cool card. I think it's a bottom of tier 2 deck. It doesn't necessarily do very well against a lot of the top decks, but you have very powerful combos at the very beginning of the game. For example, things like turn 2 amp you very much. Also, hitting Wellspring turn 2 can just sometimes win you the game. So it does have a lot of different options, and the versatility does keep it a competitively viable deck, but I don't necessarily think it's a top of tier 2 deck. I think as we kind of start to fill this in, it'll start to fall back towards the bottom of tier 2, but it's definitely a solid deck in general. The biggest thing that hurts it, in my opinion, is just the consistency. It just doesn't necessarily set up very well sometimes because you have so many different moving parts. Next up here, we got Grimmsnarl. Grimmsnarl, in my opinion, is a tier 1 deck. I have it right below Golden Go at the moment. I think that Grimmsnarl is a very, very strong deck. Has pretty much a chance against everything in the format. Its matchup against Gardevoir is also pretty favored as well. So taking a good matchup into the deck that is widely considered by a lot of people to be the best deck in the format is really important. So yeah, I think that, Grimmsnarl is definitely in a pretty good spot right now, and I currently have it towards the top of tier 1. Next up here, we have Joltik Box. I think Joltik Box is kind of a sleeper deck at the moment. You have a pretty decent matchup into all of these top decks, in my opinion. I would say your Gardevoir matchup is pretty close. Your Golden Go matchup is pretty solid as well. Your Grimmsnarl matchup is also pretty good. It's actually one of Joltik Box's strongest matchups, and your Dragapult matchup is pretty close also. However, you do have some pretty rough matchups, specifically Raging Bolt. If you play against Raging Bolt, you can't really do a whole lot against that deck, and one of the problems also Joltik Box sometimes runs into is it's so linear that you don't really have a whole lot of outplay potential. There's just some spots where you feel so restricted as a deck, so that's, I think, one of the things that is holding the deck back. But I think it's pretty good right now, and definitely think it deserves that spot at the very top of tier 2 or the bottom of tier 1. So at the moment, I got it at the bottom of tier 1. Next up here, we got Evolutions. We got Flareon, the Flareon with, things like Sylveon, also potentially Umbreon if you want to help out against the Gardevoir matchup, and also Leafeon as well. Just, kind of depends on what techs you want to play for specific matchups. I think it's pretty good. I think it has kind of a chance versus everything. Now, its matchups overall aren't necessarily great, but you take a bunch of 50-50s. Your Gardevoir matchup, though, in my opinion, even if you tech for it, doesn't feel necessarily still very good. So that's one of the problems that I have with it, but it's a solid deck overall. It just doesn't necessarily excel in anything that some of these other decks do. Next up here, let's go over the other Charizard variant, Charizard Pidgeot. Okay, so this deck Gabriel Fernandez used to win the most recent North American International Championships in Seniors, and I think it's pretty good overall. It doesn't necessarily gain a ton of crazy cards from the new set. It gains access to things like, potentially Hilda if you want to play it, but I think people would rather just play the Arven, and also it gains access to Air Balloon as well, which really helps against decks that try and confuse you with Mind Bend. Being able to effectively have that free retreat is very nice. I think Charizard Pidgeot is a very well-positioned deck in the format because your Gardevoir matchup is pretty close. I would say it's leaning towards slightly favored for Charizard. Your Golden Go matchup is good. Your Grimmsnarl matchup is about 50-50. Your Dragapult matchup is close as well. Your Joltik Box matchup is a little bit shaky. Kind of depends on what grass techs they play against you. But the big one that you have going for yourself right now is going to be having a really good Golden Go matchup because you have access to Chi-Yu, and Chi-Yu being a one-price Pokemon that can deal with the Golden Go is just so powerful. So that's a big reason as to why Charizard is in the tier 1 category. There's a lot of really good decks right now. There's a lot of decks, in my opinion, that actually have the potential to see success. Next up here, we got, let's do some of the fun decks. Typhlosion. Actually, I'm not going to put in fun. I'm going to put in tier 3. It just struggles with, consistency overall in some spots, and your matchups against Gardevoir and Dragapult just aren't necessarily very good. However, you do gain access to the Brave Bengal, which can help out quite a bit in certain situations, but it still has a lot of the inherent problems that it had last format. We got Yamega. I think it's a fun deck. Zoroark, I think, is like a bottom of tier 2 deck. I have it above Ho-Oh, though. It's like fine. Its matchup against Gardevoir is pretty decent. Its matchup against, Golden goes okay, but its matchup versus things like Dragapult, Scary, Joltik Box, Rough, Charizard's not great as well. So I also think it's kind of inconsistent at the beginning of the game. Like, when you get all your Zoroarks up, it feels great. However, the problem is actually getting there. So that's currently why I have Zoroark as a tier 2 deck, kind of towards the bottom. It has a lot of decent matchups, but it has some inherent problems at the very beginning of the game. It just feels very vulnerable. But, if you are able to hit a lot of the Gardevoir archetypes, being either the Jellicent or just, the regular one, you definitely have a pretty good chance of going far. Next up here, we got just the Crustal archetype in general, just walls. This deck has actually been showing up in quite a few online tournaments and has been seeing success. I personally think it's a tier 2 deck. I think there's going to be someone who shows up to a major tournament, for example, the upcoming World Championships, and just hits all the right matchups and sees a bunch of success. I would not be surprised. It's a kind of matchup roulette wall deck that, you could potentially go like 9-0 with on the first day, or you could go 0-3 drop. You don't really have a whole lot of control over situations. So at the moment, I got Crustal in tier 2. I think it's better than people give it credit for. We'll probably put it at the bottom right now, just simply because it's so reliant on tech cards and just what you're playing against. So yeah, it's an okay deck. Next up here, we got Raging Bolt. I think Raging Bolt is a top of tier 2 deck. This would probably be a tier 1 deck if the Gardevoir matchup did not exist. However, the Gardevoir matchup is just so bad on top of it as well. Your Charizard matchup, if they play Chi-Yu, also becomes very scary as well. Your Go-to-Go matchup is actually pretty decent overall, so that's, one deck that you actually have a decent matchup against. Your Grimmsnarl matchup is pretty decent as well, but I think it's just a little bit weaker than some of these decks in tier 1, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad play. Potentially if people start to, I guess, fade away from Gardevoir because there's so much Grimmsnarl and also Golden Go, then maybe the Raging Bolt starts to see a lot more success and becomes a really good play. But at the moment, if Gardevoir is expected, both the non-Jelly variant and also the Jelly variant, they both expect to see about 7 to 10%, I would say, each at most, then this deck gets a lot weaker. But it's still like pretty good overall. I gotta say, actually, just like going back to Gardevoir, I think like regular Gardevoir will be like probably moving forward 8 to 9%, and then Jelly might be 3 to 4, kind of rounding out to that, I guess, in the range of 12 to 13 ish percent. But yeah, maybe 14, 15 if it peaks. All right, next up here, we got Miraidon. Miraidon does gain a few new cool cards. For example, things like the Air Balloon, also Zekrom as well. So those are a couple really good cards that it gains access to, and as well as Electric too. You can play the Eels, you can potentially play a 2-2 line, or you could play a 1-1 Magneton line and then the 1-1 Eel line as well. However, it loses still so much consistency from the most recent rotation that I think it's still going to struggle. It did gain some of the firepower back that it lost. However, it didn't really gain the consistency that it lost. It lost so many important cards. For example, things like the Forced Sealstone, which was huge. Rotom as well was actually one of the most important cards for the Miraidon archetype, simply because, when you lost the coin flip and your opponent forced you to go first, having access to that Rotom just meant that you could build up a huge hand and make sure that second turn was incredibly explosive. So it lost a lot of things. I mean, also lost like Luminion as well, so much. So the deck has gained a little bit back, but not having access to so many of those consistency cards. I can't believe I forgot to mention the DTE as well, not being able to hit, Ampy very much as you, would like on the first turn. I have to put it in tier 3, but it's close. It is getting close to being a competitively viable deck again. For example, if they reprint something like the Double Turbo Energy, then this deck definitely becomes a lot more viable. But yeah, I currently have it at the top of tier 3. I think it has some potential, and I wouldn't be surprised if some saw, I guess, some like moderate success, but I don't necessarily think it has the legs to go far right now. Next up, we got Toedscruel. Wow, there's a lot of decks in this format. All right, let's go over Toedscruel. Toedscruel, I think, is probably a top of tier 3 deck at the moment. Its matchups against a lot of these just aren't necessarily great. Its Gardevoir matchup has much to be desired. Its, go-to-go matchup's actually pretty decent. Its Grimmsnarl matchup is not as good as I think some people think. I think the matchup is Pretty sketchy overall, actually. Especially if they have like access to Blood Moon or Saluna, they can one-shot the Toad Scroll with like Monkey Dory, which actually can be kind of an issue. But yeah, it's like a pretty decent deck overall. It kind of is similar to Raging Bolt, where it just kind of tries to run the opponent over, and if they're able to set up, things can get kind of rough. But Toad Scroll just kind of feels like overall a more linear variant of Raging Bolt, because Raging Bolt has those really powerful one prize attackers, whereas Toad Scroll doesn't really have that. So I think that's one of the big things that Raging Bolt has over the Toad Scroll, which is why I currently have it in tier 3. Next up, we got Mewtwo. I have it in fun tier. Roaring Moon Donk, I guess, tier 3. Terrabox, if no one plays Shaman, has some potential overall, but its Gardevoir matchup just is not really that good in general. I think that's one of the big problems that Terrabox has at the moment. Its Dragapult matchups also aren't great either. So currently I have Terrabox in tier 3. Garchomp tier 3 as well. I think that's completely fair for the deck. Festival Leaves put down here. Saraledge tier 3 too. Kind of just feels like Golden Go is just overall better in general. We have Ancient Box bottom of tier 3. Not a ton to say on this deck. Losing things like Pokestop and Radiant Greninja were really big for it. You do okay into Gardevoir, but a lot of the other matchups are pretty scary overall. For example, your Charizard matchup is really difficult, and also your Dragapult matchup is pretty tough as well. Your Grimmsnarl matchup too. You just don't have great ways to one-shot those Pokemon, so they can set up potentially like multi-prize card turns and just kind of take over and run you out of resources. Last up here, we have Archaludon. We have Archaludon Bomb. This has been seen, I think, a little bit of success over in Japan in some online tournaments as well. It's like solid. I think it's a decent deck overall. Having access to the Rocket's Bomb and also Monkey Dory is a pretty cool combination, because if you flip heads, you deal damage to the active, and if you flip tails, then you just fling the damage back over with that Adrenabrain. So you have some pretty cool combos going for you. But it has a Charizard, I would say, issue. Even though you can prevent the weakness, you just like sometimes run into these problems where like end game they just put a Charizard active and they one shot you and you can't really deal with it. Like your Gardevoir matchup is kind of scary as well. Your matchup against like I guess like Golden Go, they just one shot you and it's kind of hard for you to one shot back. So I don't know, it has some problems for sure. From my experience play testing with Archaludon decks, it's just if there's anything that can one shot you, which there are quite a few decks in the format, you can definitely run into some problems. But anyways, we're going to put this at the top of tier 3 right now to end it off. Let me know what you think of this tier list as well. Shout out to Zapdos TCG for making this template too. But anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. Thanks for all the support as always. I appreciate it. This is Smart TCG. I'll speak with you guys again soon. Peace out.